wherever you're listening to Inside the OutHaus, welcome to this particular conversation. My name is Pete Smith, orator and telemarketer, and it is a great pleasure to welcome Lucinda Martinelli to the OutHaus today to share from Whole Planet Consulting. And she is coming to us at the crazy time of 1:13 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in the Midwest of the US. But welcome, Lucinda. Lucinda and I first met at the AEE virtual conference, which was a great event, which was hosted in November last year. And I had the pleasure of attending one of Lucinda's workshops, and I was pretty inspired by what she had to say regarding this topic of facilitation, and was interested in sharing it with a wider audience, which is what we do here in the OutHaus. I guess Lucinda and I earlier this year had a conversation via the virtual world, and she agreed to come in and talk to us. And here she is today. Just before we kick it off, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we call Australia, and their connection to land, water, and community. I'd like to pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to thank the wonderful team of the OutHaus oligarchs for all their work in making this event possible and doing the good work behind the scenes to make this happen. Without any further ado, I'm going to throw over to Lucinda, and she can introduce herself, and we can go from there. Thanks, Lucinda.
Thanks so much, Pete. I'm excited to be here, even though it is the middle of the night where I am. It's fine. I am talking to you from Wisconsin today. My home is in the state of Michigan, which is the one that's surrounded by Great Lakes. I've crossed one of the ponds, and I'm in Wisconsin today, the traditional current and future lands of the Ho-Chunk people. That's where I am today. I'm excited to talk to you all, and I'd love to hear a little bit about who you are and what brings you here today and what your work is. It's great for me to be able to talk to you about what I do in conjunction with what you do. The model that I'm going to present to you today is a model of facilitation, and facilitation happens in a lot of different areas for a lot of different reasons, and I'd love to know what your connection to the material might be. So if you can introduce yourself, I would love to know more about you and who's here. EJ, would you be willing to go first?
Sure. Yeah, my name's EJ. I'm based in Far North Queensland in Cairns. I've known Pete for quite some time. He's an adventure buddy of mine. Yeah, so I do some work through Cape Yorks, Indigenous communities, mainly with schools and young people, working and partnering with the ranger groups, getting camps and classroom on country. So, a lot of facilitation. Yeah, that's mainly what I'm doing nowadays.
Thank you. Rob, how about you?
Yeah, g'day. I'm Rob, based on Wurrung country in Victoria. I work in outdoor education on a hardtop camp, and I'm running centre-based activities on a daily basis, a few times a week. I've done a lot of work in journeys, expeditions, and I'm just setting up my own business as a sole trader, doing outdoor activities for therapy and respite purposes.
Great, thank you. And I know, Darren, you're listening in. If you want to put that information in the chat, you can. If you have the ability to unmute yourself, I welcome that. do the awkward pause while we wait for something to appear in the
I
chat.
could introduce myself so we don't have an awkward pause, if you like.
There we go. While Darren's
My
taking
name's
a few
Pete
minutes.
Smith, and I divide my time currently between working as a sessional teacher at the University of the Sunshine Coast here in, I guess, the southern part of Queensland, and another organization called the Outdoor Education Consultants, for which I instruct bushwalking and canoeing type stuff. So it's interesting for me talking about this because I've moved from working with young people, being, I guess, people between the ages of 13 and 18, to now more working with an adult group of people. So I'm just interested in perhaps different strategies depending on who the population is you're working with. So that's me.
Thank you so much. And Darren has weighed in the chat. Venture Scout leader, adventurous activity leader for Scouts Victoria, and a freelance outdoor ed specialist. Love it. So I wear 3 different hats, which all kind of overlap. I am the creator and director of Whole Planet Consulting. And what I do in my consulting business is teach people to create and leverage teachable moments. So those times when we want someone to get some learning from whatever it is that we're doing. And facilitation plays a large role in that. I'm also a facilitator for the University of Michigan Adventure Leadership Program, where we do team building, and we use high ropes, low ropes, and climbing tower to do that. And I'm a trainer for a ropes course builder. So I train facilitators. Anyone who has a ropes course needs to be trained to use it properly, and that's one of the things I do. So I'm using facilitation in a lot of different ways, and I'm teaching facilitators a lot. I'm teaching either people in the adventure world and the outdoor education world, but also the formal classroom world, which those are viewed very differently here in the States. I think I'm gathering from what you all do that maybe there's a little more crossover. Here, those are very much separate. Outdoor education is very much not as, it's not as revered as formal education. Formal educators kind of look down on outdoor educators that we just play all day. So I don't think we do. I think we do something very important. And I think that the outdoor education world has a lot to teach the formal education world as well. So a little bit about my background. I've been doing outdoor education, environmental education, outdoor education, adventure education since 1991. I've worked in camps most of the time, but I've also worked in schools. I have been certified as a science teacher in biology and general science at the secondary level, so 12 years old and up. But most of my career has been in outdoor education, often with children, but I'm more often working with adults now, college age and above. So let me talk to you a little bit about how I came to this model, and then we'll talk about the model itself. And I want to get your kind of feedback about how you use the things that that I'm going to present to you today. I started, like I said, I started in camps, and I've been doing experiential education for, like I said, since 1991. But I did not realize until 2018 that that's what I was doing. I left a job that I thought I would have for a really long time. I had that job for 18 years. Excuse me. Very dry today. When I left that job, I was doing all those things I mentioned: environmental education, experiential education, outdoor education, and adventure education. But it was never mentioned to me that experiential education was what I was doing. So I went to my first AEE conference in the Southeast of the United States, and my eyes were opened. And since then, I've gone to a lot of conferences in the experiential realm, but also in the formal education realm. And it took me a while to really pin down what was important about what I do and what it was that I wanted to focus on. I was hearing all these terms and all these different curriculum kinds of things. So I was hearing things like culturally responsive teaching and trauma-informed teaching. And there are particular programs in the United States. Complex instruction is one. Literature circles. I actually applied to a PhD program as well, and they wanted me to really focus in on what is it about teaching that you think is important. And I was like, well, all of it is. And the more of these programs I learned about, the more I realized they were all based on facilitation skills. And I learned about a model called the communities of inquiry. And I'm going to share my screen here. I have kind of a complicated slide. Get back to here. Share my screen. This has a lot on it. But when I was introduced to this model says that in any educational experience, there are three presences of the educator that are crucial to have in any experience: the teaching presence, the cognitive presence, and the social presence. And when I saw this made a whole lot of sense. In my training as a teacher, a formal educator, we learned a lot about curriculum design, lesson plans, assessments, that kind of thing. We spent a lot of time on that. We also spent some time learning about how people learn. So that cognitive presence. How do students apply new ideas? How do they connect ideas? Educators talk about scaffolding. We talk about differentiated instruction, multiple intelligences, Bloom's taxonomy, kind of categorizing the actions that people need to do while they're learning. I also have friends who focus on creativity. And I thought, yes, all of these things are really, really important. But that didn't capture what I do and what I think I have to bring to the educational world. And when I saw this model, I was like, aha, it's the social presence that I think is missing. When I came up as a teacher, and they were trying to teach us about classroom management, a term which I have some quibbles with at the moment, but they said, well, we can't really teach you classroom management. You have to just learn it when you're in the classroom. And I thought, okay, fine. And as I've been trained as a facilitator, I didn't get a lot of formal training as a facilitator either. I just observed someone else doing what they do and then just experimented with it. It was a very much trial and error. But once I started working for a university, I was introduced to, and actually once I started going to conferences, AEE conferences in particular, I learned that there are models. There's research about experiential education and the best ways to do it. And I started getting into training facilitators. And I realized, you know, there are ways to learn about classroom management, about how to manage a group of people and do it well. And so that's where that social presence comes in. And I thought, aha, this is what's missing in education right now. Teachers are not taught this social presence. And so there are all these other programs responsive classroom. There are people who specialize in community building. But then there's also a lot of mindfulness and culturally relevant pedagogy, trauma-informed teaching, all these different things. And teachers are being bombarded with all these specific programs. And they're all fantastic. They're all wonderful. But none of them encompass everything about that social presence. And so I started to really dial down on what I thought that social presence could be and how to teach it to other people. So I said, aha, facilitation is my thing. So I started looking around for jobs, and I typed into the job search facilitation. And I got things like Agile Scrum Master. And they're like, oh, you're a facilitator, you must do Agile, which is a business thing. And I was like, no, I don't know anything about that. Or, you must facilitate DISC or one of these other business models. And I was like, I don't do that. So I kind of went back to the drawing board and thought, well, what do I mean by facilitation? When I say facilitation, what do I mean? And then I went to the education world and applied for a PhD. And I said, facilitation is important in the classroom. And they went, what does that mean? What do you mean when you say that? That's not a word that is used in education here. It's not something that meant anything to them. So I thought, okay, I'm going back to the drawing board. So eventually, I have created a model of facilitation, 6 skills that every facilitator needs. So what I'd like to do is talk about each one of these one at a time. I'll talk about what I mean by them and then get some input from you all about how you think you would use it or how you think you do use it in your facilitation, in your work. So the first one I'd like to start with is going slow to go fast. This is the one that I have to explain the most, I think, and it has to do with how you begin. So going slow to go fast, to me, means establishing the routines, the information, and the relationships that you need in order for the group that you're working with to function well. So in the classroom, if you have young kids, this may look like the routines for how you retrieve materials throughout the day, or how you get from one place to the other. But it also looks like the community building that we often do when we're facilitating an adventure, having people introduce themselves and be comfortable, and setting off that way, setting up the kind of the expectations, the boundaries, where we're going to go, what we're going to do. All of those things are part of going slow to go fast. Setting up those things help later on when things get difficult. You have these routines or you have these relationships to fall back on. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see you all again. So I'd love to get your feedback about going slow to go fast. In what ways do you think you do that in your work? And or would you like a little more discussion about what I mean by that?
I've just got a comment, if you don't mind.
Sure.
In my world, I find that going slow to go fast is a great way to go. But I think that in a lot of my educational situations, I find that time constraints that are, shall we say, external to my facilitation are put on the program or the lesson, if you want to put it that way. And these hamper my ability to go slow to go fast.
Mm-hmm. I think you're not alone. I mean, I think that's definitely, I know that sometimes when I work with people, I only have 2 hours with them or less sometimes. I know here classroom teachers get a lot of pressure to really dive into the content. There's a group of people I've been working with, and they've started having this saying, connection before content. And so as we start a session together, we make sure that we spend time connecting with each other before we delve into whatever the content is. Today, for example, I had people introduce themselves before we delved into, my model or, whatever I had to present to you, as a way of making those connections before we jump into that content. And yeah, the pressure can be immense. So let me ask you this. Are there times when you have that time pressure, but you still make sure that the people in the room connect before you jump into whatever else it is you're doing? And if do you find benefits to that, or do you find that you can just jump right in and do that content right off the bat?
Well, at least from my experience, I have found that spending the time actually getting to know the group in whatever format you take that on as a facilitator benefits the overall learning. And I think it benefits the overall learning almost enough that if you if you miss a little bit of content, then I think the benefit of actually creating relationship within your group far outweighs whatever the content is you missed. What do other people think?
I think everything happens in the context of relationship. And if we miss the relationship because we're so busy with trying to achieve the outcome or fulfill the program, then we can very well miss the crux of why people are here and what they're trying to achieve. And I've been saying to my instructors that there's 3 parts of the program. It's people-centric, it's program-centric, and it's outcome-centric. And at any point, all 3 of those variables need to be dynamic within each other to achieve the whole goal. But if you're not making it people-centric for the majority of your program, you're just treating them as objects. And no one likes to be treated as an object.
I love that focus. What was it? People-centric, outcome-centric, and program?
Yes, that's correct. So if we program-centric, we're very stuck on our times and we have to do this activity now and this is what's on the program. If we are very outcome-centric, we have to achieve our goal, whether it's to the inflexibility of saying, actually, maybe we need to address something else on the program while the people are here because you see a different dynamic in them. And then if we're very people-centric, we can also shift sometimes to a place where we actually lose the outcome or we lose the activity. In other words, it becomes about comforting the people and trying to meet their needs consistently, and then we might shift and lose our focus of what the customer or the school required. So we've got to balance all 3 all the time, and the instructors and whoever's running the program needs to be aware of that yeah, if we're very program centric, then you might be too focused on time and you might miss having to say, just go another 10 minutes on this because you're going to catch that key moment.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think one of the things that gets missed in some of the educational situations that I'm in is we're so focused on those outcomes without remembering that connection is going to get that outcome. And the activity may get cut short, but if those relationships are there, then the outcome is still going to be a good one. And that the building those relationships can help pave the way to get to those outcomes more easily.
Very much
so when we miss them, we miss an opportunity to get the outcomes we were looking for.
Very much so. And I believe that people want that connection immediately. They want good structure and good connection are the two things that will make your program. And if you can get that done in the first 15 minutes of how you meet and how you greet and how you interact with your participants, you know, the first 10 minutes will make your rest of your camp or your program easy or hard.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, very much.
What about those people in other nations besides Zambia? Do they have a perspective on this particular question?
Can we just get a reiteration of the question? Just I had a young lad, my son, come in and halfway through your posing the question, which drew my attention away. G'day, everybody. G'day, Alan. Thanks for your insights.
G'day, Brent. Good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. Sorry, Lucinda, could you just rephrase it? And then I've got some thoughts in my head, but I just wanted to make sure that they were collected or connected to what you're talking about.
Sure. What is the importance for your work of going slow to go fast? And in what ways do you do that?
Yeah, it's a really great one. I work in the university sector with students who will become teachers. And facilitation is, a colleague of mine, Glyn Thomas, if you haven't read his work, Lucinda, he did his PhD on facilitation, and written quite a lot about it. So I can find some links, or Pete can pass them on.
Fantastic. Can you put his name in the chat for me?
Yeah, we'll do. But I guess a big large part of it, we talk about facilitation versus delivery, because a pizza man delivers the pizzas. And we're educators, so we don't deliver pizzas, not all the time anyway. But yeah, we have this focus on intentionality. So for me, a big part of what the students in my cohorts are aware of what my intentions are, and I make them quite clear. So we don't try and hide things in our facilitation. It's quite open and honest. We talk about the notions of what is going on here, and this is my perspective. So we don't talk about sort of this notion of this is something that I see that's going wrong. We'll talk about, you know, these are the things that I'm witnessing going on. Can we maybe unpack that? And I guess in that process, it slows things down. And because we want to create environments where students are grappling with the ideas and not sort of flitting past them, for want of a better word, not moving past them too quickly. And we want them to be thinking from the position of both being a participant or a student within the course, but also with their future focus of being educators. So so that's slowing down. So sometimes we won't become too focused on what the program requirements are, rather than where are we at with their teaching components. So that's not to say that, you know, the logistics don't drive us at times, but even in that, we're intentional. This is the realities of where we're at right now. We're going to have to cut that short now to come back later on. And Pete's had the wonderful opportunity to work with Pete at times, and I'd hope to say that Pete would reiterate that what I just expressed was on the money, or he's going to tell everybody that's nothing at all. He does this.
No, absolutely true. Absolutely true. Because I'm operating alone, I'm trying to look for articles written by Glyn Thomas. So I'm sort of trying to drive two boats.
I can do that, Pete. I can do that. I'll drive that boat. So I'll drop some things in there. But a great sense of, but also I guess a big part of it is there's a fellow by the name of Mike Brown from New Zealand, who wrote about facilitation and on the notion of what are we facilitating for? So is it, as me as a leader, just to get nice pat answers at the end of the day to say, hey, I did stuff with this group. Yeah, they all told me that I did stuff with this group. Or is it about waiting and pausing? And Glyn would reiterate this too, and following the direction of what they're trying to say and not having set pathways that the conversation will go on. And by nature of that, it's got to slow down. So, and Mike Brown often pushes back on the notion of the facilitation circle, you know, those stayed sort of scenarios of where it all happens. The students get adjusted to that. It's like, oh, right, Brennan's going down this path. Let's all get our answers prepared and, you know, trot them out as we go, versus those, well, teachable moments and yeah, those ones that come up as it goes along. So I'll find some articles for you though.
Fantastic. I love that. Yeah, I was introduced to a term recently, facilitation. That merging of facilitation and manipulation. And when I heard that term, I thought, oh, I've done it. I know I've done it. You know, there's a particular outcome that I am expecting out of this activity, and all the groups do it. And so that must be the right answer. Yeah, I'd like to think that I don't do that anymore. I hope I don't do that anymore. And I get so much more out of it when I go the direction that the group wants to go, the group needs to go. I've had some interactions recently. Last summer, groups came to me just, I don't want to say broken, but they were definitely hurting. And previous to that, I really hadn't delved into, you know, how do we heal those hurts with each other? But well, boy, we delved into it last summer in a pretty deep way. And some of the things that came out of those days were amazing. I had groups of high school students who, you know, were very hesitant at the beginning of the day and were, you know, hugging and crying at the end of the day. And that's not an outcome that usually happens in the few hours that I have with people. And it was really amazing. I want to make sure that I'm keeping an eye on the time a little bit. So I'd like to move on to the next skill. So I will share my screen again so you can be reminded what those 6 skills are. And the thing what I'd like to move on to is being open. And I think we've started talking about this already. When I talk about being open, I talk about being open to outcomes or questions or information that I wasn't expecting. The next one on the list is questioning genuinely, and these two things are really tied together very closely. When we're questioning genuinely, we need to be open to the answers that we're getting and the things that people are telling us. So I think we've talked about that a little bit, kind of following where the group goes. That's part of that being open. How else do you all see being open as being an important skill for a facilitator?
I think, like you said, Lucinda, like with your intended outcomes, but also unintended outcomes. I think that's very important because that can also drive a group in a direction that maybe perhaps they didn't think they needed to go. So I wholeheartedly agree with the unintended outcome aspect as well.
I've heard discussion recently a lot about the yes and mindset. So someone says something comes out of improv, I think. Someone says something and the next response is yes, and this other thing, rather than yeah, but that yes and mindset and that growth mindset are part of this being open to what other people are talking about, what other people are actually saying, rather than constructing our response before they're done with what they have to say. Other thoughts?
From Zambia. Being open to participants saying no. Is always a big one because, you know, what I've realized is saying no is also a life skill, and yet we often want the participants to participate and come to a place where they can say yes, and they did it. But how often are we saying to them actually and celebrating that no is an important life skill and giving them the ability to say that and support them in it without feeling that they're being excluded from the group?
I love that you brought that up. I just had a conversation with Tom Leahy recently about my model, and he asked, where does choice fit in to this model? And that's where it fits in, kind of right there. And he's talked a lot recently about challenge by choice and kind of the evolution of that idea. And I thought about it, and I thought choice is an outcome of good facilitation. Being able to make those choices is not a skill that facilitators have. It's a skill that facilitators are teaching through their facilitation. And the participants being able to make a choice that's good for them is an outcome of good facilitation. But I like how you put that we need to be open to the answer being no. And to that choice being no, I'm not going to do whatever it is. I love that.
Well, I would add to that conversation, a lot of learning can actually happen as a result of a facilitator and even the group deciding that no is in fact the answer at that particular time for them. And it doesn't mean they won't potentially revisit that learning later in their learning pathway.
Yeah, Tom talks about regret being a good teacher. Someone saying no to whatever activity that day and then saying, oh, how could I get to yes? How could I, do this differently? And when would that be a good choice for me? That can be a really good teacher.
And I do really like what Rob has put in the chat about Graham Pringle's comments on participation via choice versus challenge by choice. I think that's a much better way to word it. And if you wanted to listen to Graham's chat, you can check it out on our website or our YouTube channel.
Great. I will do
Yeah,
that.
and Pete, that's actually something I integrate into my practice now, working at an outdoor ed centre before every session, particularly those involving heights or physical contact with other group members. I'll frame it really explicitly and say to the young people, you get to choose whether you do this, and if you do, you get to choose how much. I'm not going to choose. No one here has the right to choose, and your teachers aren't going to choose. And I say that explicitly. I don't even chat one-on-one with the teachers. I just say it right there with the whole group. And so we're all part of that agreement. And I'd ask them, does that sound fair to you? And sure, there's not much room for disagreement, but I'm open to teachers approaching and saying, well, actually, we'd like to set, a benchmark, and I'll have that discussion and explain why I don't. Just rocking up that's my bottom line.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Pete.
No, I just was going to agree. I fully agree with what Rob said there. I think that's very valuable.
I've started thinking about choice. So early in my career in the 90s, it was presented as, are you going to do this thing or not? And I think a lot of people that I've worked with have really seen choice that way. Are you going to do the thing or not? And I've started really viewing choice. Choice begins when you set foot on the property. Choice begins with how you introduce yourself to us, how you play this first game. And I've learned to illuminate the choices that people are allowed to make within the game that we're playing. Here are the guidelines, and here are some choices that you have. if you're doing something high that requires equipment or a harness or something, there's a choice to put this harness on or not. There's a choice in whether you're going to do it or whether, I can physically get in there and help you with it. There's a choice about who your partner is, that kind of thing. Choosing a partner for a 7th grader is a high risk activity. And I've recognized that, there's some risk involved there, and that it's a choice, and that I need to let them choose and not make them be partners with, whoever it is I think they should be partners with. It's wide ranging, and I feel like I could do a day-long workshop on choice alone. It's a deep, deep, deep topic.
And I'll just ask the room, because I'd like some feelings from other people. How many times have you been in a situation where, you're doing said activity and a participant has said, well, I'd like to choose not to do this activity. And then the follow-up comment by the instructor, facilitator, teacher, leader will be, oh, well, come on, just put a harness on. And is that counterintuitive to that person's choice, I guess, is my question to the room. If they've already made a choice, then are we pushing them down the wrong road by saying, well, just get into a harness. Just come to the edge of the cliff. See how it is.
Yeah, I would think so. I have real problems with the notions of challenge by choice and comfort zone and the language that's associated to it. And I agree with Rob, like that intentionality of sort of, and Darren and his sort of stuff as well that he's posted there. People are actively engaged in other ways. And I think we can be pseudo-psychologists, and lots of facilitators, outdoor education facilitators, fall into that bracket of being a pseudo-psychologist. And that's something I attempt to dispel with my students right from the word go. And you're actually being complicit in their feeling in unease as soon as you say, how about you just put on a harness? You'll be all right. Come out and have a look. Because ultimately you're trying to create a slippery slope that suddenly they're there and you're sort of pushing back against their first decision. So, yeah, I just say, well, sit around for as long as you like. You can change your mind if you want to. I'm scared sitting out here. Don't worry about that. But, so yeah, I think it changes it. I think it's a real problem, Pete, like you've identified.
And I think just the language that you used, Munj, is really relevant. And I think, just sit around for as long as you like. And if all you achieve during this this session is to sit around and observe the group, then as Darren has rightfully pointed out in the chat, that might have great input into the reflection process later.
Mm-hmm. I've worked with students on the autism spectrum quite a lot, and being involved in a name game for a person with autism is a challenge, and it may be a challenge they're not up for that day. And I've had facilitators kind of push back on the student who wants to stand at the edge of the circle and draw. And they're like, oh, they're not participating. And they absolutely are participating. They're participating in a way that works really well for them. And if you ask them about what they've drawn and or what the group has been doing, I bet they have some really fantastic observations. And allowing that and recognizing that that is participation, I think, is a really, really important point.
Well,
Very much so.
I think as facilitators, educators, teachers, leaders in whatever environment we're doing those things, I think we need to be careful of putting our social, cultural biases on the group. Because what I see as participation might not be what a group of people that I'm working with sees as participation.
I agree, Pete. And like in my context where I work with a lot of youth at risk, and generally like youth in communities throughout Cape York, when you add the cultural factor into, you're working with a group of young people, and then there's the shame factor. So you can't push that participation on that level that, you know, that sometimes is pushed upon young people, because otherwise it becomes detrimental. Now, I just want to add around the participation by choice as well. I think that links in really well with the self-determination theory, the 3 principles of autonomy, competence, and relatedness as well. And I think, like you say, Lucinda, you know, you can go really deep with that.
Thank you.
EJ, would you mind putting a link to that particular theory that you discuss in the chat, if you don't mind?
I can email you some PDFs, Pete,
Yep.
and then if you can pass them on.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Again, I want to make sure we're looking at the time.
Top of the hour.
I'm going to move on to some other aspects. So I'm understanding, in my head, the story I'm telling myself is that we have about an hour to talk to each other. Is that correct, Pete?
Yeah, that's correct. So we started
Okay.
at 13 minutes past the hour in your time zone. So we normally finish at least the recording at 13 minutes past the hour.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll move on to some other aspects, and yeah, I'll stay on as long as you want to talk about these things. I could talk about these things all day long or all night long, as the case may be. I keep clicking on the wrong thing. Share my screen. There we go. So we've talked about going slow to go fast, being open. Questioning genuinely has to do with asking questions we don't know the answer to. And again, I think we've touched on that quite a bit in our discussion of challenge and choice. And I think this really gets at teachers in particular. At least when I came up as a teacher, I was taught to ask a question and I'm looking for a specific answer. I'm asking a question for I'm looking for the student to regurgitate information back to me. Questioning genuinely has to do with asking questions we don't know the answer to, either related to the person we're asking or related to the content that we're asking, which gets at inquiry a lot more. If I'm just asking questions that I already know the answer to, that's not inquiry. I'm not inquiring about anything. I'm not exploring anything. I'm just getting information exchanged back and forth. Questioning genuinely has to do in particular with questioning the people. I like your model, Alan, the people-centric. If I'm asking you, how are you? And I think I know the answer to that question, then I'm not questioning you genuinely. And I've found that people can detect pretty quickly if you're asking genuinely or not. One of the things I run into with students is that they've been in classrooms with teachers who have not asked them questions that way for so long that it takes sometimes half an hour, 2 hours sometimes for them to realize that I actually want to know what they think. I don't want to hear the buzzwords. A lot of the time they're fishing around. I asked something about what was a good thing, what was an important thing that your team did during this activity. Communication, teamwork, they're fishing around for the right answer, for the thing that they think I want to hear, when I actually want to know what they actually think and what they actually observed. And it sometimes takes a while. And let me skip ahead to observing closely as well, because these 3 things: observing closely, questioning genuinely, and being open, I think are closely tied with each other and are kind of nuances of each other. Observing closely has to do with observing behavior and realizing there is no good behavior, there is no bad behavior, there's just behavior, and behavior is communication. It tells you something. So let me stop sharing and chat about those 2 things for a bit, and we'll wrap up with the other 2 in a bit.
Lucinda, how do you work in the context of realizing there is no good or there is no bad behavior? I understand the concept of behavior as language, and people are trying to express themselves through a way that they've learned to express themselves in a situation. But I'm interested in the concept of how do you manage no bad or no good behavior? It's just behavior, especially.
I lost the end of that, but I think I can answer the beginning of your question. So this has been a difficult one for me. As a classroom teacher, there's definitely behavior that's not conducive to a group process that's positive, for sure. And there's behaviors that in a group are just not helpful. And working with very young children who don't have as much control yet is really challenging for me, because my reaction is just stop that. Like my initial reaction is I just want to stop that behavior. And I think as a teacher coming up through and being trained as a teacher, one of the things that is talked about is classroom management. And what classroom management is really is controlling behavior of your students. One of the things I've come to realize is that I don't have control over the behavior of my students. They have control over the behavior, their behavior. And so what I've started thinking about, I'm trained as a science teacher. And so in science, we talk about cycles a lot. And one of the cycles that's really talked about a lot right now is engineering. So the process of engineering, building something, considering, what did it turn out like? How would we change it the next time we do it? And so in my interactions with students, what I'm doing is helping them to engineer their behavior to get the results that they want, to get the results that are positive. And tied to our conversation about choice, sometimes I have to allow them to make a choice that's not a great choice. And to just have consequences ready, and to let the consequences help them learn how those choices, how there might be other choices that might benefit them more. It's tricky. But I think for me, recognizing that there is some reason why they're behaving the way that they are, that makes sense. It may not make sense to me at the moment, because I may not know all the reasons for the behavior they have, but just recognizing that's not a bad kid is a really crucial point of view. Because I don't think there are any bad kids. There's behavior that's conducive to a positive environment. There's behavior that is not. But it's all behavior that it tells us something. It may tell us that that student needs more support in order to be in the classroom all day long. It may tell us that, that student needs, it may tell us about their needs more than it tells us about, the goodness or badness of what it is they do. Did that answer your question, Ellen?
It's very complex.
Yeah,
it
is.
And the context of it is also changes all the time. So it's just it's finding the balance, I think. So I come from a perspective of, behavior is language, and what are people trying to tell me by their behavior? But some of the people that I work with come from the context of, well, you're not listening to me, therefore it's bad, or you're not behaving, therefore it's bad, and just trying to find that balance of managing the risk, managing the safety, managing the other participants, so everyone gets the best benefit, and at the same time trying to include someone whose behavior is not conducive to the growth, or not necessarily the growth of the group, but to how they're interacting with others.
Yeah. And I think that conversation about safety is really important. Not only physical safety, but that emotional safety as well. It's taken me a long time to get to the point where I will call out things that are just not safe. I was reading recently, I'm trying to remember which thing it was, a put down being a form of violence. That was a kind of an aha moment for me. I always felt it that way, but I didn't always illuminate it or bring it out in the groups that I had. That's a put down. What just happened right now is a put down, and that's goes beyond the boundaries of safety that we've set for this group. So that's something that we're going to change, and we're not going to do here. So yeah, there are, to a certain extent, you have to put up those boundaries for safety. In order to be able to make the choices that students need to make, they need to have those boundaries. And we need to be explicit about that and very definite about what those boundaries are, and recognize that there's a reason that students have those behaviors. And it's not the student, the behavior itself isn't bad, it's just not conducive to our situation at the moment. And I don't remember who it was that first used this phrase, but I use it all the time now. There's a time and a place for that, and it's not right now.
Yeah.
I use a language called, go on, sorry.
Okay, sorry, I was gonna say, yeah, before I understood emotional health and the power of connection, we used to send the participants back to their teacher, and they would sit out because they were at a risk score. And over the last few years, I've really been trying to see how can we continue to keep them connected to the group without causing a harm. And in the sense of use, that trying to protect that connection and resolve why that connection is broken in some ways. It does make the facilitation and the activity, or the process of the activity, sometimes a lot more challenging. But when you get it right, the benefits are, okay, well, we didn't actually complete that activity, but the next time you move on to something else, you've learned, you'll be able to do it now. So yeah, it's that, I suppose it's like everything.
Yeah.
Where's
facilitation facilitation is a dance, right? It's never the same thing twice. Yeah, it's always squishy.
I use some language quite often, and it was from, we used to do working with youth at risk, this sort of strength-based facilitation focus, but I often use language with students around those boundaries and what's okay and what behaviours are right, with these concept of negotiables and non-negotiables. So I lay out my negotiables and non-negotiables, and then we have a chat about, well, what can be negotiated and what can't be. And I remember a guy speaking, be about 2006 now, and it's always stuck with me, his choice of language, where he said, that's a conversation we have, that's not a conversation. So he was quite clear when people, that's not a conversation. No, we need to do X or we need to do Y, and making that intentionality of it right from the word go of, there will be some things that we can have a conversation around, we can negotiate and we can have a chat about, and some of your behaviours and that sort of stuff. And then there'll be others which, because of safety, time, whatever it might be, or safety to others, risk to others, it's not a negotiation. So if we need to come back to it, we will. And then we'll have a different conversation about why I've made that choice. But right now, we're not going to have a debate about those things. So and I think that gives quite clear information to the student and or the participant. And, laying them out early. I haven't done many contracts or any of those sort of things, those facilitation contracts around what might be happening, but I think it works quite clearly. Pete's seen it in action. I don't know, Pete, do you see that working, that negotiation, non-negotiation type stuff?
I think it totally works, Brendan, and I think you know, it's about clarity for all of the people within any group, and I think clarity in students or participants and clarity for the facilitator leads to, shall we say, the best outcomes.
Yeah. And there's some things that it's a bit of a crossover from some of the safety stuff that I'm working on at the moment that's come from nursing and elsewhere. It's actually having language that they can articulate. So in safety, there's not always the language to articulate if you're a junior member in a field staff to say that, I think that's unsafe. How do I bring that up with Munch, who's had 20 years of experience? I think what he's doing is unsafe, but actually teaching them some language that to you as a facilitator is a trigger to recognize, oh, this person's trying to broach something with me. And it's as much for them as it is for you to be sort of recognize, hang on, there's something going on here that I've missed. Even with my own little boys, they put their hand on my arm, that sort of thing. That's their recognition that they want to speak. But we need to teach our participants, these are some mechanisms to draw my attention or get a sense that maybe things aren't so good with you. So how can we do that?
Love that. I'm looking at the time again.
I'm conscious of the fact that we have come to the end of the hour, how quickly it has gone. As I said, you're quite welcome to stay and chat on a little bit. I sort of have to go away somewhere because I've got another commitment, which I'm starting tomorrow, and it involves some driving. But you're quite welcome to chat on for 20 minutes or so. But I'm just, as per the protocol of this particular discussion, I am going to stop the recording. There's a lot to unpack, which around behavior and stuff that we haven't all talked about. But I will stop the recording, and then we can continue to have this conversation. Just before I do that, I'd just like to thank again Lucinda Martinelli for giving her time, particularly in the wee hours of the morning from the Midwest of the US, to come and talk to our audience about facilitation. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much. It's been great.